So we are continuing this faith story series that we've been doing for a fair while now. We've been looking at loads of different people through the Old Testament. Lots of people who are like heroes of the faith type people, really. They have done amazing things, and every one of them has what we call a faith story. You might describe it as everyone has a testimony, a story of what God has done in our life, in other people's lives. And what we've been learning through this series is that we can look at the faith stories of different people throughout the Bible, and we can really learn from their experiences. There's a lot of stuff that we can glean out of these people's lives. And really, we've only been doing a little snapshot. Every time we've been looking at a different person, we've done like a small little moment from their lives. There's multiple different moments throughout the lives of these people that we could spend ages looking at, but kind of to have a bit of a trajectory, we've tried to just pull one bit every time. And last week, Jenny was taking us through Ezekiel and his life and gave us this brilliant overview of kind of the whole of his life, his journey, his mission, really, that he did, and pulling out a few things that maybe resonated with us. And this morning I'm going to be continuing that look, and we're going to be looking at the life of Daniel. But before I kind of dig into the moment that we're going to look at in Daniel's life, I like to always start by asking a question, just getting our brains thinking. And I wonder whether you've ever found yourself in a compromising situation. I wonder whether intentionally, by accident, or you just stumbled into it somehow, you found yourself in a moment that has left you having to make a choice. Maybe it's left you having to make a choice between your faith, staying true to what you believe, and having to compromise in some way to not lose friends, or to not lose face, to stay popular, or to avoid the isolation that might come if you stand up for this thing, or you don't do this, or you say that. The consequences otherwise could be hurtful. They could leave us isolated. There's so often a pressure to fit in that sometimes requires us maybe to hide our faith, to not speak up, or to join in that conversation at work that we maybe know isn't probably the best thing. It's probably not the nicest thing about the person who's not even there, but we're talking about them behind their back. But everyone else is doing it, and if I stand up for the person, which might be the right thing to do, I don't know how they're going to react. Or maybe you have to tell that little white lie to save face because we've got ourselves in a bit of a sticky situation, and it's easier to do that. That's the easier way than kind of backtracking and admitting that we were wrong and owning up to what we did and saying sorry. And we can be faced in those moments with a tough question of how do we remain faithful to God as followers of Jesus when we're faced with the challenge to do things differently in compromising situations. And as I said this morning, we're looking at the life of Daniel. Bit of context for Daniel before we look at his life and the moments that we're going to be exploring this morning. Daniel was, again, a prophet from the Old Testament. We've looked recently at this sort of long series of prophets, people called by God to speak up to the people of Israel, largely speaking, to offer warnings to them, to sort of say, look, if you continue in this way of being, if you continue this behavior pattern, if you continue to put God to one side and worship other things, it's not going to end well for you. So they had quite a brave job, really, to be a prophet. And Daniel's story comes, along with a few of the other prophets, after the first exile to Babylon. So King Nebuchadnezzar, who's the king of the Babylonian Empire at the time, has conquered the Israelites, and as was their custom, they've dragged away loads of the people from Israel. They kind of choose the best and the smartest and the most skilled people, and they take them away to train them to be Babylonians, basically. They take the smartest and they use their skills, they use their knowledge, and they try to get them to think like a Babylonian, to act like a Babylonian, to sound like a Babylonian, to worship like a Babylonian. And that's what happens in this story. It follows a period of about 70 years, from about 605 years before Jesus to about 535 years before Jesus. And Daniel is the last book in this section of the Old Testament known as the major prophets. There's then this following section known as the minor prophets as well. And like I say, it takes in this moment when Israel has been overthrown and they're living in exile. And Daniel and the people that we're going to read about are living in Babylon. They've been taken away from their home of Israel and they've been forced to live in Babylon. And we're going to look at two passages, two chapters in the book of Daniel, one of which doesn't actually even involve Daniel, but one of them does. And I wonder already, as kind of, maybe if you've read the book of Daniel before, you might know some of the stories, and you might sort of be thinking, I wonder whether he's going to pick that, or I wonder whether he's going to pick that moment. Or maybe he's picked both of the moments that you might be thinking of. We're going to look at chapters 3 and chapter 6 of Daniel. So if you've got a Bible with you, now's a good opportunity to grab it. We're going to start with Daniel chapter 3. Use a phone as well. You can kind of tap it and swipe your way to Daniel chapter 3. Or if you've got a nice paper Bible with you, then you can flick your way to Daniel chapter 3 with me. And I've called this talk this morning, Faithfulness in the Fire. So maybe your brain's, if you know the story, your brain is already going, okay, I know which passage he's going to be looking at. But we're going to read Daniel chapter 3. We're going to be reading probably quite a chunk this morning, but do follow with me if you can. We're going to read the rest of chapter 3, and then we're going to read a lot of chapter 6 in a moment for these two really important parts of Daniel's life and the life of three of his best friends who we're going to be looking at. And it starts in chapter 3, verse 13. And we're going to read from verse 13 all the way through to the end of chapter 3. So follow with me. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar, that's the king of Babylon at the time, summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now, a bit of a backstory. The king Nebuchadnezzar has built this 90-foot gold statue. He's got a bit of a thing about himself. He likes to be the man about town. And he's told everyone they need to bow down and worship it. And these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, have decided not to. And then they're brought before the king, which is where we've picked up the story. Where did I get to? I've lost my place now. Worship the image of God that I've set up. Verse 15. Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, zither, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty." I love how they still refer to him as your majesty. They're kind of being defiant in this moment, but they're still using the niceties and politeness. "We want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up and throw them in the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took them and threw them into the fire. These men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods." King Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors, all of Nebuchadnezzar's henchmen basically, crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a single hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own gods." How amazing a story is that? So this is a story of three of Daniel's best friends, really. They're nothing to do with Daniel in this moment, even though we're looking at Daniel. But this looks at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which isn't their real names, to be honest. These are the names. So one of the things when you get taken into exile in Babylon is they give you a new name because they don't like your Israelite name. Instead, they give you a Babylonian name to help you think like a Babylonian and speak like a Babylonian and act like a Babylonian. So their real names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And what we read there is that King Nebuchadnezzar, with his kind of inferiority complex, has set up this 90-foot gold statue because he wants everyone to know that I am king. I am the big one. And so he gets everybody in the land to bow down and worship this gold statue of himself. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego aren't having any of it. They don't do it. They something about them says, we're told that we can't worship any other god, to put God first. I'm not doing that. I don't care what this king thinks about himself. I don't care how big he makes his statue. I'm not going to do it. And I wonder, how would you act if you were in their shoes? I wonder whether we'd have the courage to stand there defiantly and be like, "King Nebuchadnezzar, no." I'll be the first to admit, I don't know if I would. Knowing that I'm going to be thrown in a very, very hot oven and killed, I don't know if I'd have the guts to do it, to be honest. If it was me, and it was me and two of my other friends, I'd probably have said to them, "Look, boys, we've got a good thing going here. We've got a good job. We're being paid really well. Okay, look, we're living, okay, new names, don't like my name, and food's not great. It was better in Israel. I'll give you that. But, this king has given us good responsibilities. He's treating us kind of nicely. If we don't bow down, then he's going to take that away. Oh, and we're going to die." Or maybe one of the others would turn to you and say, "Look, boys, I don't do well with the heat. I'll be honest, I'm more of a winter kind of guy. So maybe we don't do this. We've got an opportunity here. We can tell people about our God, but if we die, we can't do that." It would have been very easy for them to do that, wouldn't it, based with the circumstances, but they didn't. They didn't bow down. In verse 18, or verse 17, just before it, if you go back to that, it says, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand." That's like quite a defiant way of saying, no, our God is bigger than you. He's bigger than your 90-foot gold statue. He's bigger than all your musicians. Whatever, we're not doing it. And then they add the little extra bonus line in, which really does it. Verse 18. But even if he doesn't, we don't care. Just think for a moment how bonkers it is to do that. It's brave enough to stand there and say, our God, is bigger than yours and he will save us. Oh, but even if he doesn't, still not doing it anyway. And I don't care if you throw me in a fire. Even if God doesn't save me, I'm not doing it. But actually what we see in the story is that God does come through for them in a miraculous way. To not even smell of smoke, having spent time in the fiery furnace. They don't even smell of smoke. They come out, and the king is amazed and blown away. They were faithful in the fire. So that's our first story. Our second chapter that we're going to look at, the second part of the life of Daniel and his three friends, comes in chapter 6. So flick over a few pages, a few swipes of your phone, and you'll get to chapter 6. We're going to pick this up right near the start of chapter 6 in verse 4. And for the sake of speed, we're going to cut a few bits out. You know, we don't really want to hear about people being thrown in the lion's den and being eaten. So we're going to skip those bits out. And we're just going to read the bits that really talk about Daniel and what happened to Daniel. So we're going to start in verse 4. So a bit of context to this passage as well. Nebuchadnezzar is no longer in charge of Babylon anymore. It's now King Darius. And King Darius has got his own, cabinet with him and his own advisors. And they don't like Daniel. So they try to set up a plot to kind of get Daniel exposed, set him up so that they can get rid of him. Verse 4, chapter 6. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. See, he was actually he behaved in the right way as well. He didn't do things wrong. So they couldn't find any way to legally get rid of him. So they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the laws of his God." They think they found a loophole. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors, a lot of people, isn't it, have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except you, your majesty, shall be put into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree to put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Cutting a few bits out, they find that Daniel doesn't follow this. So he continues to follow his daily rhythm of praying 3 times a day. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Verse 11. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king, spoke to him about his royal decree, and yada, 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 kind of say, "King, didn't you say that actually people aren't allowed to be doing this? By the way, this Daniel bloke is still praying to this God of his. He's not praying to you. He's not worshiping you. He's praying to this God of his." So they twist the king's arm. And the king gave the order. This is verse 16. The king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, this is quite a funny bit that the king kind of says. I think the king really likes Daniel. So verse 16. The king said to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." He's kind of like, "I'm in a bit of a bind here, Daniel. You've done what I've kind of decreed that this isn't allowed. You've been worshiping this God. I've got to throw you in the lion's den, but I kind of like you. Maybe your God can rescue you. Maybe it'll be all right." But secretly, he's thinking, "I know what those lions could do." You're in trouble. Moving on a little bit. Verse 19. So the king kind of has a bit of a restless night's sleep and thinks, "I feel a bit bad for Daniel." Anyway, next morning, first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice and said, "Daniel?" I imagine him kind of getting to the foot of the thing, being like, "Daniel, are you there?" Anyway, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to rescue you from the lion's den?" Expecting no response other than maybe a burp from one of the lions. Daniel answers, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Moving on to verse 25. So just prior to that, he then throws the people that set Daniel up into the lion's den, and it does not end well for them. Just a spoiler. Then the king Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples in every language of the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and revere the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So again, what an amazing story. Daniel was put in a tricky situation. Continue praying and probably get thrown in the lion's den, or give it up and stay safe. But he says, I'm not doing that. I'm going to continue to pray. And actually, what it says there, he prayed to God for help. He acknowledged that I'm in a bit of a bind here, and he knew his first place he needed to turn was God for some help, to help him get out of this situation. I wonder, again, what would we do in this situation? I, for one, would probably crumble. Or maybe what you'd kind of do is try and do it a bit more secretly, in a bit more private. Maybe while everyone else is stood around, you sort of just be there in your head, being like, oh, God, thank you, God, and please don't let me get caught, and these people don't like me that much. And it just wouldn't be the same, would it? He'd be sort of trying to do it, but not really be able to do it. So what things can we learn from these moments of the life of Daniel and the life of his three friends? As I say, we're looking at faithfulness in the fire. Both Daniel, faithful in the lion's den, and his friends, faithful in the actual fire furnace. I think there's two things, really, two important things, I think, for us to look at this morning and to think about from this passage. Just going to have a drink. The first one is that I think we are called to live differently. Oh yeah, skipping ahead. There's a few bits that I missed out there. La-di-da, even if, yeah, they say all that. They've thrown in the fiery furnace. Next chapter, danger in the lion's den. See, these would have been brilliant. I should have used those. We are called to live differently. In the first commandment of the 10 commandments that God gives, it says, you'll have no other gods but me. We are called to live differently. Now, I don't think this is just because God is a bit big-headed and wants us to always put him first. But I don't know about you and your own life, but I know for me, the times in my life when I really have got God in the top spot of my life, those are the moments in my life when I feel like I'm more at peace, when I feel like I've got the capacity to deal with what life throws at me a little bit better. I'm not kind of like shaken around as much, or I just feel a little bit more on an even keel. Like life can't throw me a curveball. As when it does throw you a curveball, I feel like I can deal with it that little bit better. And the moments in my life when God isn't, when I'm worried about something else, or my focus isn't on God, those are the times when it feels a bit more rocky, or it feels a bit like you're sinking in the water, or whatever it might be. So I think God has given us that command because I think he knows what we're like. And he knows that actually, if you put God first, if you put me first, actually the other things in your life fall into place a little bit better. Other things don't come at you as badly. You're more easily able to deal with the punches that life inevitably is going to throw at you. Jesus himself promises us, he says, in this life you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. By putting him first, we're able to take heart and know that. So we should always have our aim to put God first in our lives, to live differently. Jesus himself warned how dangerous it is for us to try and live with multiple things fighting for top spot in our lives. Listen to these words. This is from Matthew chapter 6, and he says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now you could put in that there for money something else in your life. Obviously money is a big one in our lives, let's face it. Fights happen over money. Money is a bit of a thing that gets in the way of us all the time. Gets in the way of human relationships, especially relationship with God. But it might be nobody can serve God and their phone. Or nobody can serve God and pleasing other people. Nobody can serve God and themselves. I think all of our decisions, therefore, can be put through this filter in our lives of, I'm faced with this decision. If I do that, is that going to put God first in my life? Or actually, is it not? Or if I do that, is that going to be putting God first in my life? And that helps us to know what decisions we can make. When we're faced with a challenging situation, a compromising situation, maybe that will give us the courage to say, no, I know I want to put God first in all situations of my life. And that one, I don't think he's going to do that, so I'm going to have to do that. It allows us to make better choices. Paul, who writes a lot of the New Testament letters, urges us in Romans chapter 12. He says to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. Everything that we do for God, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship, he says. He says, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing will. When we put things through that filter of sort of saying, will this put God first or will it not? It allows us to test things and make better decisions that put God first in our lives. We think more about how we act because we're putting things through this filter. When things are happening at work and they're having that conversation over in the corner and you know it's about somebody else, and maybe regardless of your feelings about that person, you sort of think, that's not how I think I should act by joining in with that. I'm going to either distance myself from that conversation, that's one way to deal with it, or we say, guys, I don't think we should talk about that person like that. I mean, they're not even here, we're talking about them behind their back. That's not really cool, is it? So it allows us to take moments to stand up, be more defiant, and defend people that aren't there to defend themselves. Or when we're faced with a situation that asks us to compromise our faith, maybe we'll have the strength to say no. The King Nebuchadnezzar of that moment, to say, no, actually, I'm not going to worship your 90-foot gold statue. Actually, in my life, you might say, actually, I'm not going to worship Instagram or give that all of my time. Actually, I'm going to give God more of my time because I know that's the right choice to make. And in our lives, it's probably nowhere near as big as the challenges that Daniel and his 3 friends faced. You're probably not at risk of being thrown in a giant oven at work. Or you're probably not at risk of being thrown into a lion's den. It's probably less life, your life is probably less on the line, but it's still smaller things, and they're still as dangerous in our lives. They still take the place of God in our lives. So that's the first thing, I think, that we are called to live differently. And the second thing is that when we live differently, people will notice. Now, this is either an encouragement, or actually, this is a really scary statement. That when we act differently, people will notice. And you think, yeah, actually, when I act differently, people are going to see that. They're going to see God at work in my life. Or maybe you think, oh gosh, if I do this, people are going to know. Oh, that's quite scary. I don't like the idea of that. Take a look at those last few verses again of both those chapters. Chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar, the king at that time, said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and has rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, were willing to give up their lives rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Nebuchadnezzar at the time, he acknowledges that and actually goes on to try and kind of, put things in place so that actually his people would worship God. Flick forward a few chapters to the life of King Darius and Daniel being thrown in the lion's den and left stroking them like pet cats. We see this, for he is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lion's den. Both times, the kings noticed something. I mean, it would be hard not to notice, right? I mean, it would be hard to not notice that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not burnt alive in the fire. And actually, there was a 4th person with them that looked like a son of the gods. God had sent his angel to rescue them. Bit hard to not notice that. And also Daniel being left alive when you've left him overnight in the lion's den. Again, when you come the next morning expecting the worst, it's a bit hard not to notice that he's left alive. So they noticed, and it changed them. It can only be that it changed these kings. It gave them a moment of pause, thinking, maybe I'm not actually the big one in town. Maybe their God is actually bigger than me, bigger than my statues, bigger than anything else that I can do. Their God actually is quite impressive. And I remember, I'll never forget this moment in my life where not long after I'd become a Christian in my teenage years, and I'd become a Christian at a camp, where, residential, where lots of it happens for teenagers, moments in their lives. And I'd come home and had said to my parents that it'd been a bit of a journey. I said, look, guys, I believe in God, actually. I want to be a Christian. And life kind of went on, seemingly no different for me. But then time goes by, and I remember a conversation I had with my mum and my dad as well. And they're like, something about you is a bit different these days. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? They're like, well, you're a lot more peaceful than you used to be. Now, I don't remember being a really angry kid, but I was prone to getting frustrated, like we all do. But, they'd noticed something different in me. So I had started to live differently. I had a different way of living. Even though I didn't necessarily feel that I was radically doing things differently. But to them, it was really obvious. They noticed that I was living differently. My faith had been making a difference in the decisions that I made, the actions that I took, the words that I spoke. And it was noticeable. It was obvious from how I lived my life. I lived differently, and people, those closest to me, noticed the change in me. Listen to these words from Jesus, fantastic words from Jesus. Matthew chapter 5. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. You see, when we put God first in our actions, in our choices, in the words we say, in the way we act, people will notice. But they might not just notice and go, James has been a bit weird. He's a bit nice. Yeah, I thought it was a bit of a, whatever. James is never here. He's always at church on a Sunday. But actually, they won't just notice that. I would bet that they will eventually probably ask you a question as well. Why is it that you are the only one around here while everything's kicking off? You're quite calm. Like, what's the deal? How are you not stressed out like the rest of us? Because, maybe a situation's going on at work and, things are blowing up. And actually, you are engaging with a calm presence, going about it, because God is first in your life, not this stressful situation. And your colleagues go, how is it that you're still so calm in this situation? Oh, well, it's my faith that makes the difference to me, actually. This isn't the biggest, most important thing in my life. God's the most important thing in my life. And he gives me the strength to face every situation that I face. It's like, oh, okay, wow. People will notice. They will ask questions. They'll start exploring why. And maybe, just maybe, that will lead them to going, I wish I was that peaceful in this situation. Maybe there's something in this faith thing. Maybe I could pray to God for some help as well. Maybe he'll listen. You never know what happens in that situation. So I wonder, as I wrap this up this morning, I wonder for you this week, there's a lot there to look at, a lot of kind of, maybe it feels a bit heavy, to be honest. I wonder what's resonated with you from that this morning. Maybe it's one of those two things, or maybe it's both, or maybe it's something even different in the passage we've been reading. But I wonder, what can we do about it? Because it's all well and good me standing up here for a few minutes and talking about it and saying, guys, we've got to live differently, and when we do, people are going to notice. It's all well and good saying that. But how do I do that, James? Well, I've got a challenge for us. And this is purely invitational. Everything is purely invitational. God doesn't force anything upon us. But I feel like maybe he wants to give us this challenge this week. And this is for me as much as it is for anyone else here. But maybe identify in your life one thing, just one thing. There might be loads, but pick one. One thing that constantly seems to be getting a lot of your attention and a lot of your focus, a lot of your time, your energy, your worship. You can pick whatever it might be. It might be your work. It might be your phone. It might be whatever else it might be. You know, it might be video games. It might be shopping. It might be anything else that is getting in the way of God being first in your life. And then when you've thought about that thing, bring it to God, obviously. And for the rest of this week, limit the time that that has in your life. Limit the place that it finds itself in your life. Put it underneath God in your life. And say to God, I need your help, because the reality is we can't do this on our own. Our willpower is not always that strong. So by saying, God, I need your help to put this thing much lower down in the pecking order of my life, and I want to put you back where you belong. And as you do that, maybe that's a daily thing for you to do at the start of your day, at the end of your day, in the middle point of your day, whatever it might be. Maybe it's multiple times a day. See what difference it makes in your life. See what difference it makes in the way you think, the way you act, the words that come out of your mouth, the presence that you bring to a room. Because I'm pretty sure that as we do that, things will change in our lives. We'll be different. It'll be obvious that we are different, and people will probably take notice. As you step up for people that maybe haven't got anybody to speak for them. Or as you make active choices to put other people first. Or you spend a lot less time on something, and in that time you're spending time with God in prayer or in thought or listening. You know, maybe you're changing your music choice from whatever it is that we might listen to songs that are going to fill us up with truths about who God is. Whatever it might be, see the difference it makes in your life, because I'm pretty sure it will make a difference. And see what happens. Who knows what could happen? God knows. But maybe we'll see what happens as you do that in your life this week. And then maybe you feel encouraged by that, and maybe next week is another thing. And slowly but surely, because this is not an easy overnight switch, the things in our life that are maybe taking that priority get put a bit lower down in the pecking order, where they belong under God instead. I'm going to pray. Worship band, would you like to come and back up, and we're going to finish with some songs of worship. Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you get us, you know us, you're with us. As we've already said this morning, where we've gathered here this morning, you are with us. And Lord, I ask for each one of us this morning, definitely for me included, would you help us to put you back where you belong, in top spot in our lives, number one. And all the other things that throughout our lives fight for that control, fight for that top spot. Would you help us to put them further down the pecking order of our lives this week? Help us to live differently. Help us to say things, do things that reflect you at work in us. And help us to be open to the opportunities when people notice, for conversation, for talking about you and the difference you make in our lives. Come, Holy Spirit.